November 8, 1939. Munich, Germany, early evening. Outside, cold air settles over the city as crowds move through narrow streets toward a familiar gathering place. Inside the Bürgerbräukeller beer hall, wooden pillars rise beneath heavy ceilings darkened by smoke and age. Long tables are packed tight. Beer steins clink. Party banners hang motionless. This is a ritual, one repeated every year, on the anniversary of a failed coup that became a cornerstone of Nazi mythology. At precisely 8:00 p.m., Adolf Hitler takes the podium. His voice carries across the hall, echoing against timber and stone. He speaks longer than planned. The war he expected to end quickly has not gone as promised. Outside Germany's borders, Europe is already burning. Then something unexpected happens. Hitler concludes his speech early. Weather reports warn of fog. Trains must be caught. At 9:07 p.m. he leaves the hall, escorted by aides, unaware of what remains hidden behind the walls. 13 minutes later, the beer hall erupts in violence. A carefully constructed bomb detonates beneath the podium, tearing through the structure with devastating force. The ceiling collapses. The room fills with dust, fire, and screams. Hitler is already gone. And with that narrow escape, history veers onto a darker path, one that demands understanding how this moment came to be. By November 1939, Europe stood at the edge of catastrophe, but not yet at its deepest point. 2 months earlier, on September 1, German forces had crossed into Poland. Within weeks, Poland was crushed under coordinated assaults from west and east. Britain and France had declared war, yet on the Western Front, guns remained largely silent. The period would soon be known as the Phony War, a conflict declared, but not yet fully unleashed. Inside Germany, Adolf Hitler appeared confident. His early victories reinforced the image of an infallible leader, one protected by destiny, luck, or something darker. Nazi propaganda portrayed him as untouchable. Public rallies were carefully staged to project unity, inevitability, and control. Dissent existed, but it was buried under fear, surveillance, and ruthless repression. The annual November 8 commemoration at the Bürgerbräukeller was more than a speech. It was a symbolic anchor of Nazi legitimacy. Every year, Hitler returned to Munich to mark the anniversary of the failed 1923 beer hall putsch, a moment of humiliation that had later been transformed into myth. The location mattered, the routine mattered, and because it mattered, it was predictable. Germany in 1939 was a nation mobilized for war. The economy was stretched. Food rationing had begun. Men were being drafted in growing numbers. Air raid preparations were underway in major cities, yet many Germans still believed the war would be brief, decisive, and victorious. Hitler's authority seemed unchallenged. But beneath this surface of obedience, quiet resistance existed, not in organized armies, not in mass movements, but in individuals isolated, determined, and willing to act alone. One of them was a carpenter from Württemberg. His name was Georg Elser, and his path toward that beer hall began years before the war ever started. The roots of the assassination attempt lay not in foreign intelligence services or military conspiracies, but in the slow radicalization of a single man watching his country change. Georg Elser was not a soldier, a politician, or a member of Germany's elite. He was born in 1903 in Hermeringen, a small town in southern Germany, and trained as a carpenter. His life followed a quiet, working-class rhythm marked by manual labor, modest wages, and long hours. He was skilled with tools, precise, patient, comfortable working alone. As the Nazi Party rose to power in the early 1930s, Elser watched the transformation of German society from the margins. He saw trade unions crushed, independent political parties dissolved, wages frozen while working hours increased, religious freedoms narrowed, dissent punished. He was not affiliated with any resistance organization, nor was he guided by foreign powers. His opposition developed privately, gradually, and deliberately. By 1938, Elser had reached a conclusion few Germans dared to articulate aloud. Adolf Hitler was leading Germany toward a catastrophic war that would destroy millions of lives. Elser believed that removing Hitler and the core Nazi leadership could prevent that outcome. It was not a spur-of-the-moment idea. It was a calculation. The Bürgerbräukeller provided an opportunity shaped by routine. Every year on November 8, Hitler stood at the same podium at the same time in the same hall. Security was present but not airtight. The structure of the building itself, its thick pillars and hollow cavities, offered concealment. For a man trained in craftsmanship, the environment presented possibilities. In August 1939, weeks before the invasion of Poland, Elser moved to Munich. He took lodging near the beer hall. Night after closing hours, he hid inside the building. Using hand tools, he slowly hollowed out a load-bearing pillar behind the speaker's platform. The work took weeks. Dust was collected and removed in small amounts. No one noticed. Elser constructed his own bomb, complex, timed, and reliable. He tested detonators repeatedly. He calculated delays down to the minute. The device was designed to explode during Hitler's speech, not before, not after. By early November, everything was in place. What followed was not chaos or improvisation, but precision, patience, and waiting. And soon, the focus of history narrowed to a single evening, a single schedule, and a margin of just 13 minutes. Unlike many later plots against Hitler, the 1939 assassination attempt was not the product of a fractured military elite or an internal power struggle. It was the work of one man, acting entirely alone. Georg Elser told no one. He sought no approval. He trusted no network. His isolation was not a weakness, it was his protection. Elser understood that conspiracies failed when too many people were involved. Surveillance inside Germany was already extensive. The Gestapo relied on informants, fear, and routine arrests to crush resistance before it could take shape. By acting alone, Elser reduced the risk of exposure to almost zero. There were no intercepted messages, no suspicious meetings, no accomplices under pressure. His motivation was neither personal gain nor ideological purity. Elser believed that killing Hitler would save Germany from destruction. In later interrogations, he would state plainly that his goal was to prevent war. At the time of the bombing, Germany was already fighting, but Elser believed escalation could still be stopped. This was not martyrdom. Elser planned to escape. He timed the device and attempted to cross into Switzerland the same night. His intent was survival, not fame. The significance of his solitude would only become clear after the explosion, when authorities searched for networks that did not exist. And in that absence, the regime would struggle to understand how close it had come to losing its leader. The assassination attempt exploited something the Nazi regime prized: ritual. Hitler's annual appearance at the Bürgerbräukeller followed a predictable structure: arrival, speech, applause, departure. The symbolism was powerful, but predictability creates exposure. Security measures were designed for crowds, not for the building itself. The hall was searched but not dismantled. Guards watched people, not pillars. Elser's bomb was hidden behind wood and stone, invisible to a system that assumed loyalty rather than sabotage. Hitler's decision to leave early was not driven by fear. It was logistical. Poor flying conditions forced a change in travel plans. He needed to return to Berlin by train. The speech was shortened. Applause ended sooner than expected. The routine broke, but only slightly. And that slight deviation, unplanned and unremarkable, became the most decisive factor of the entire operation. The bomb Elser built was not crude. It was sophisticated, mechanical, and designed with redundancy. Using parts acquired gradually to avoid suspicion, he assembled a device that relied on two independent clockwork timers. both calibrated to detonate the charge at approximately 9:20 p.m. This was not guesswork. Elser tested the mechanism repeatedly in controlled conditions. The explosive itself was powerful enough to collapse the speaker's platform and bring down the ceiling above it. Elser understood structural force. He placed the charge at a height and depth intended to maximize downward collapse. The goal was not noise, it was lethality. What technology could not account for was human deviation. The bomb detonated precisely as designed. At 9:20 p.m., the explosion tore through the beer hall, killing 8 people and injuring more than 60. The podium was obliterated. The area where Hitler had stood minutes earlier was destroyed. The device worked. The failure was not technical, it was temporal. 13 minutes separated success from catastrophe. And that narrow window highlights a brutal reality of assassination attempts. Timing is often more decisive than planning, skill, or intent. Within hours, Nazi authorities sealed off Munich. The Gestapo launched a massive investigation. The assumption was immediate and rigid. This had to be a coordinated conspiracy. Foreign intelligence, communist cells, British agents. Someone had to be behind it. When Georg Elser was arrested near the Swiss border the same night, he appeared unremarkable. His pockets held tools, sketches, and detonator components. At first, investigators dismissed him. A lone carpenter did not fit their expectations. Interrogations followed, brutal ones. Elser endured prolonged torture. He was beaten, deprived of sleep, and subjected to psychological pressure. Yet his story never changed. He insisted he acted alone. He named no accomplices because there were none. The regime refused to believe him. Hitler, informed of the attempt, interpreted survival as confirmation of destiny. Propaganda framed the escape as proof of divine protection. The assassination attempt was transformed into a narrative of invincibility, strengthening loyalty rather than weakening it. What had nearly ended the war instead hardened its course. The explosion at the Bürgerbräukeller was not the climax of the story. It was the hinge upon which everything turned. At 9:20 p.m., the blast tore through the heart of the beer hall. The speaker's platform disintegrated. A load-bearing pillar collapsed. The ceiling crashed downward in heavy sections of timber and masonry. Tables were crushed. Glass shattered outward into the street. Survivors stumbled through smoke and darkness, disoriented and bleeding. 8 people were killed instantly. Among them were long-serving Nazi party members who had attended the event every year. More than 60 others were wounded, some critically. The destruction was total in the immediate blast zone. Had Hitler remained at the podium, survival would have been impossible. Within minutes, word reached Berlin. Hitler was shaken, but not publicly. Privately, those closest to him understood how narrow the escape had been. His schedule had shifted by 13 minutes due to weather. No intelligence warning, no security alert, just fog and logistics. That realization mattered. From that moment forward, Hitler's security posture hardened. Public appearances were shortened. Locations were altered without notice. Movements became increasingly unpredictable. The Führer who once thrived on mass rallies would slowly retreat into guarded spaces. Yet even as security tightened, Hitler interpreted survival through ideology rather than chance. He believed fate had intervened. That belief strengthened his resolve, not his caution. The assassination attempt, instead of halting the war, reinforced his sense of historical inevitability. And for Georg Elser, captured, isolated, and unheard, the consequences were immediate and irreversible. His survival, unlike Hitler's, would serve a very different purpose. Georg Elser's arrest unfolded quietly, far from the smoke and rubble in Munich. Late on the night of November 8, 1939, he was stopped by German border guards near Constance as he attempted to cross into Switzerland. His behavior was calm, too calm. A routine search uncovered wire cutters, sketches of the Bürgerbräukeller interior, and components consistent with detonators. At the time, the connection was not yet clear. Only after news of the bombing spread did investigators realize what they had in custody. Elser was transferred into Gestapo hands and subjected to months of interrogation. He was beaten, hung by his arms, deprived of sleep. His legs were broken. Still, he repeated the same account, methodical, consistent, and precise. He explained the bomb, the timers, the pillar, the motive. He named no collaborators. The regime refused to accept his confession at face value. A lone worker undermined the image of total control. If one man could nearly kill Hitler, then the myth of universal loyalty collapsed. Instead of executing Elser immediately, the Nazis kept him alive. He was classified as a Sonderhäftling, a special prisoner, held first in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, later transferred to Dachau. He was isolated from other inmates, monitored, preserved. The plan was not mercy, it was contingency. If Germany won the war, Elser would be used as proof of foreign-backed terror. If the war turned, he could become a bargaining chip, or evidence shaped to fit a different narrative. While the war expanded across continents, the man who came closest to ending it lived in silence, locked away as history moved forward without him. And the consequences of that 13-minute gap continued to ripple outward, far beyond Munich. The bombing at the Bürgerbräukeller did not halt Hitler's war machine. Within months, Germany had completed the conquest of Poland and turned westward toward France. The phony war persisted briefly, giving the illusion of calm, but the mechanized Wehrmacht soon unleashed blitzkrieg across Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. Millions of soldiers were mobilized. Cities fell. Armies surrendered. Hitler's authority, reinforced by the narrow escape, grew unchecked. The immediate human toll of the Munich explosion was smaller than it could have been, yet symbolic damage was profound. 8 people died instantly. Over 60 were wounded. Among the dead were committed party members whose presence at the hall was routine, representing the internal loyalty Hitler relied upon. Their deaths, while tragic, went largely unnoticed outside Bavaria. Public attention was diverted to Hitler's miraculous survival. Propaganda quickly reframed the event. Newspapers reported the bombing as the work of foreign enemies. British agents, communists, and unknown terrorists were blamed. Hitler himself appeared in front of the cameras, projecting calm and confidence. The narrative was clear. The Führer was invincible, protected by destiny or providence. This portrayal solidified morale among supporters and terrified potential dissenters. For the regime, the attempt revealed an unexpected vulnerability. Even tightly controlled spaces could be exploited. Security protocols were immediately revised. Future rallies were shortened or relocated. Podiums were reinforced. Timing, movement, and exits were monitored with unprecedented scrutiny. Hitler's travel plans became erratic to avoid predictability. The very habits that had made him a public icon now endangered him, and the regime responded accordingly. Meanwhile, the individual behind the attack remained alive, unseen, and largely unacknowledged. Georg Elser, a carpenter, became a ghost in the system, a living record of what could have been. His actions, though unsuccessful in their immediate goal, left a permanent imprint on how the Nazi leadership perceived internal threats. The narrow margin, 13 minutes, was not only a matter of timing, but a stark reminder that fate and human decision can collide in history-altering ways. As the war accelerated, the significance of Elser's attempt became both personal and strategic. Within the Nazi hierarchy, it served as a cautionary tale. Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich tightened surveillance on dissidents, workers, and anyone with access to technical skills. Artisans, engineers, and factory workers were scrutinized for loyalty. The Gestapo intensified background checks. Every public gathering became a potential threat, and Hitler's close circle absorbed the lesson. Even one individual could challenge the system. For Hitler, the escape reinforced a sense of historical inevitability. The Führer reportedly referred to November 8, 1939, as a confirmation of destiny. This perception emboldened his decisions in the following years, from strategic offensives in the West to the invasion of the Soviet Union. Hitler's confidence, already formidable, hardened into overconfidence, which historians now recognize as contributing to eventual miscalculations in 1941 and 1942. Georg Elser, meanwhile, suffered in silence. Transferred from Sachsenhausen to Dachau in 1941, he remained a Sonderhäftling, held apart from other prisoners and denied contact with the outside world. He was interrogated repeatedly by the Gestapo, but refused to implicate anyone else. In their reports, Nazi officials struggled to reconcile his lone wolf approach with their expectations of a larger conspiracy. Elser's clarity and courage made him both an anomaly and a threat, a man whose intellect and resolve exceeded the assumptions of his captors. Internationally, the attack had minimal immediate effect. World attention was focused elsewhere, and the broader trajectory of WWII continued. France, Britain, and Poland could not capitalize on Hitler's narrow escape. The war proceeded with brutal efficiency. Yet retrospectively, historians view Elser's actions as the closest a single individual came to potentially altering the war's course. 13 minutes, an interval almost invisible in time, separated the destruction of Hitler from the continuation of a conflict that would claim tens of millions of lives. In the years that followed, Nazi propaganda erased Elser's role almost entirely. He was labeled a foreign agent, a saboteur, and a terrorist. The truth of his motive, preventing a global catastrophe, was ignored, buried under state narratives of invincibility and ideological righteousness. Only decades later would his story emerge in historical accounts, biographies, and documentaries, illustrating the fragile intersection of chance, planning, and moral courage. The narrow escape at the Bürgerbräukeller shaped the war in subtle yet profound ways. Hitler's survival emboldened a regime already primed for devastation, while a lone man, imprisoned and silenced, remained a symbol of what could have been. History often hinges on moments invisible to the casual observer. On November 8, 1939, a carpenter in Munich acted with precision, patience, and moral conviction. Georg Elser sought to prevent bloodshed by ending the life of a man who had already set Europe aflame. 13 minutes, a margin almost meaningless in the ordinary flow of time, became the difference between catastrophe and continuation. Hitler survived, and the war surged forward with renewed intensity, claiming millions of lives that might have been spared. Elser's story reminds us that the course of history is not dictated solely by armies or governments. Individual agency, courage, and foresight can shape events, even when the odds are overwhelming. Yet it also demonstrates the cruel caprice of chance. Meticulous planning can be undone by a single unplanned decision, a few minutes' deviation, or a shift in routine. The line between success and failure in history is often narrow, unforgiving, and unpredictable. For the world, the attempted assassination of Hitler was a fleeting whisper of what could have been, a moral stand against tyranny, executed in silence and paid for with years of imprisonment. For Elser, it was both act and consequence, an assertion of conscience, and a lifelong witness to the unfolding of the very war he sought to prevent. Ultimately, the event serves as a meditation on fate, responsibility, and the fragility of human plans. It asks us to consider the power of individual action, the weight of chance, and the haunting question: how many lives might have been saved if 13 minutes had been different? In that brief span, history teetered on a knife edge, and the world continued unchanged, but forever marked by what almost happened.